They say a woman's virtue is her silence. But silence never saved anyone from burning. For 17 years, I had lived like a shadow stitched into my father's adobe walls, obedient, dutiful, untouched. I tended herbs and read scripture, baked bread, swept sand from corners, only to find it back again by dusk. I never kissed a man, but I dreamed of it, of touch not as sin, but sanctuary of being seen, not as pure, but alive. And in those dreams, I wasn't the preacher's daughter. I was someone who chose. That spring, the desert had turned brittle and mean. Even the coyotes stopped singing. Folks said it was a warning. But when the rains finally came, they didn't fall soft and kind. They came like war. The storm rose sudden angry. Thunder cracked over the Sangre de Cristo like a sky splitting at the seams. Rain lashed the roof in sheets. The wind howled like a mother mourning. I was alone near the hearth, knitting by firelight, while Papa prayed in the back room as he always did when nature turned violent. That was when I heard it. A knock. Not gentle, not hesitant. It rattled the wooden door like a fist demanding entry. My heart jumped. No one knocked on our door after dark. No one came at all unless they were desperate or lost. The second knock came louder, followed by a voice. Please, just that word. But it wasn't just a plea, it was a lifeline thrown into the storm. I stood frozen. My fingers clutched the edge of the table. That voice, it didn't sound like salvation. It sounded like a reckoning. Behind me, the hallway groaned, and I thought of the old stories Papa used to tell me when I was little, of how spirits wandered in storms of women with owl eyes who brought misfortune if you opened the door. But something deeper than fear stirred in me, a thrum in the blood. Not danger recognition. The door creaked under the weight of another knock. I stepped forward. When I unlatched the iron bolt and pulled the door open, the wind punched into the room like a living thing. Rain blew sideways. The fire behind me flickered as if uncertain whether to stay. And there they were, 10 women. Apache. Soaked to the bone, cloaked in shawls that clung to their skin. Mud streaked their legs. Some were limping. One clutched something close to her chest. A baby I'd learn later. But it was the woman in front who held my gaze. She stood tall, her chin raised despite the blood trailing from her brow. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. She had the bearing of someone who had lost everything except her dignity. She didn't beg. "We need shelter," she said. Her voice was deliberate, measured, just for tonight. I opened my mouth, but words wouldn't come. Behind me, I heard the scrape of a boot. My father stepped into the doorway. Reverend Saul Valencia, keeper of morality, wielder of righteousness, feared more than loved by the townfolk of El Cielo. His eyes took in the scene like a judge surveying a courtroom. "Clara," he said. "Close the door." The silence between us was thicker than the storm. "She's wounded," I said. "They're cold. And that one is carrying a child." "They're Apache," he said flatly. "You know what that means. The army? I know what the army has done." I snapped my voice sharper than I meant. "I read the papers. I hear the rumors." He blinked, stunned. It was the first time I had ever raised my voice to him. The woman outside spoke again. "We will leave before dawn. You will not hear us." Behind her, another figure stepped out of the dark. A tall man in a wide-brimmed hat, soaked and silent. Garrett Boone. Even I knew that name. The Canyon Hermit. Some said he'd once fought for the South. Others swore he'd lost his wife and daughter in the war, and hadn't spoken to anyone since. He had the look of a man haunted by something he wouldn't let die. "She's telling the truth," he said. His voice was rough as unshaven wood. "They've done nothing wrong." My father paled. "You brought them here?" "They were already coming," Garrett said. "I just walked with them so they wouldn't die before they got the chance to knock." Lightning cracked above us. For a breath, everything stood still. Then I made my choice. I stepped back and opened the door wider. "You're welcome here," I said. The women stepped inside one by one. Each brought with them the scent of rain of cedar and blood and smoke. When Aida, their leader, passed me, she met my eyes. "There will be consequences," she said softly. I nodded. "Let them come." The silence that followed our choice was heavy, like the eye of the storm had slipped inside with them. The 10 women sat close together on our hearthrug, steam rising from their shawls as the fire fought back the chill. Their skin glistened with rain, their eyes with something harder loss that refused to dissolve. One girl, no older than 12, held a bundle to her chest. When she peeled back the soaked cloth, a baby no bigger than my forearm whimpered weakly, its lips pale as winter sage. I brewed tea the way Mama once taught me, steeping chamomile and pine bark in a cast-iron kettle. The scent filled the room like memory. When I handed Aida a cup, her hands trembled slightly. Only then did I realize she hadn't stopped shaking since the moment I opened the door. 3 days, she said, her voice quiet but sharp. "We've been running 3 days." From who I asked, though I already knew. "Captain Elias Monroe." The name fell like a stone in water, rippling the room's stillness. "He burned our village, killed the men, took my sister." I looked at the baby. Its cry was no louder than the wind whispering through old wood. I thought of the dolls I used to cradle, the way Mama tucked me in at night. Then I looked at Aida's face and saw no softness left, only fire and ash. My father stood near the doorway, arms folded, his expression carved from granite. "Then why come here?" he asked. "Why bring your danger to my doorstep?" To my daughter, I expected Garrett Boone to speak, but he didn't need to. His presence alone was indictment enough. "They didn't bring the danger," I said. "The danger's been riding behind them for 3 days. We just chose to see it." He turned toward me slowly. "You presume to know the world. Clara, I know right from wrong," I replied, my voice trembling but steady. "And I know hiding behind prayer doesn't absolve a man from cowardice." It was the first time I had ever called my father a coward, even if only with implication. I felt the heat of it rise in my chest. Garrett finally spoke. "She's right. We all knew. We just hoped the storm would pass us by." Aida met my eyes. "It won't. Monroe is close. 2 hours, maybe less. If you give us up, he may leave you standing. If you don't, the burns this house down." My father's gaze flicked toward the crucifix on the wall. "Then what would you have us do? Harbor fugitives and pray God turns his eyes away?" "No," I said. "I would have us be human." Garrett tilted his head, intrigued. A flicker of something respect maybe passed through him. "There's a cellar under the chapel," I added, "behind the altar, from the flood of 77. Still dry." My father's mouth parted slightly. A hesitation. The first crack in the stone. "You'd hide them there?" he asked. I nodded. "We call it a sanctuary. Let it be one." He looked at me long and hard. Then slowly, without a word, he reached for his coat and walked out into the storm to unlatch the chapel door. We worked quickly. Garrett lit lanterns. I gathered blankets, salt, and dry bread. The women moved without being told, each one seeming to know where her hands would be most useful. One splinted a girl's ankle with old hymnals. Another wrung water from garments with fingers so worn they bled. When we opened the cellar hatch, a gust of earth smell rose up, damp stone, aged wood, old communion wine. My skin prickled. Aida placed her hand on my arm before descending. "You didn't have to do this," she said, voice softer now, as if Wed stepped out of battle for just a breath. "I did," I said, "because once I waited for someone to choose me, and no one came." Her dark eyes held mine. In that moment, we weren't preacher's daughter and hunted warrior. We were women who understood what it meant to be unchosen. She nodded once, then disappeared into the dark. Garrett and I replaced the rug, blew out the lanterns. The fire burned low, casting long shadows that reached for the walls like ghosts seeking a place to settle. "Clara," my father said quietly after a long time, "when did you become so sure?" I looked at him, not the man who had baptized half the county, but the man who had once tucked a feverish child into bed, trembling with helpless love. "When you stopped being," I said. He didn't reply, but he didn't walk away either. Outside, thunder murmured like a far-off drumline. Lightning flickered beyond the hills. Monroe was coming, and inside our little house of faith, every soul prepared for a reckoning. They came just after dawn, riding with the arrogance of men who'd never been told no. I hadn't slept. I sat by the cold hearth, hands clenched around the shotgun Papa had refused to bless. Garrett Boone leaned against the wall, quiet as a tombstone, his rifle across his lap, like a memory he was ready to relive. My father paced the chapel's wooden floor above the cellar, muttering scripture that trembled like leaves in wind. Below us, 10 women and a child waited in darkness, breathing hope and fear in equal measure. The air before morning was thick, the kind that made your ears ring before thunder. Too quiet, too calm. Then we heard it. A horse cried out long and low, the sound of control tightening. We scrambled to the windows. Dust rose on the eastern ridge. 15 men, maybe more. Union blue dulled by sun and ash, sabers glinting like snake tongues. They moved in formation, not scouts. A purge. Garrett loaded his rifle with the ease of ritual. "They'll bluff at the front," he muttered, "then fan out like smoke. That's how Monroe hunts." My father looked ashen. "You'd fire at soldiers." Garrett didn't look up. "I've buried friends for trusting uniforms." I stood, fingers trembling against the cool metal of the shotgun. "We're not shooting soldiers," I said. "We're defending the truth." And then we heard it, a voice deep and self-assured, cracking the morning stillness like a whip. "Reverend Valencia, step outside and receive the mercy of your country." Papa flinched. "He knows my name," he whispered. "He knows more than that," Garrett said. "He's not here to ask." I pushed past them and opened the door. Papa called after me, "Clara," but my feet had already chosen. The porch boards creaked beneath me. The morning light broke like judgment across the yard. And there he was, Captain Elias Monroe. Tall, straight-backed silver braid at his shoulders, boots polished with the confidence of unpunished sins. His horse snorted steam. His eyes found me instantly. "You must be the daughter," he said. "Clara, is it? You opened your door to the damned." I met his gaze. I opened it to the living. He smirked, amused. "Don't mistake surviving for innocence." Garrett stepped out beside me, then rifle held loose, but ready. "You're not here for justice," he said. "You're here to silence what you couldn't burn fast enough." Monroe dismounted. The earth seemed to recoil beneath his boots. He approached with the calm of someone used to obedience. "We are tracking hostiles," he said. "You have the right to cooperate. If you refuse, your chapel becomes a battlefield." My father stepped into the doorway, Bible trembling in his hands. "And what gospel justifies this?" he asked. Monroe didn't even look at him. The kind that protects its borders. "Open the cellar." I felt it then, the shift. Like the earth underfoot was waiting for someone to speak, not with prayer, but with purpose. Then it happened. A sound, small, pure, defiant in its timing. The baby cried, soft but clear, muffled but unmistakable. Monroe turned eyes sharp. "So," he said, "you chose your side." He raised his hand. I saw the gesture, saw Garrett tense. I felt the click in my bones the moment stories tip into legend. Then came the roar. Garrett fired first clean fast, blowing the rifle out of a soldier's grip to the left. Gunfire erupted like a dam breaking. Bullets tore through porch wood. Papa ducked back inside, shouting verses over screams. And then the cellar door exploded open. They rose like fire through the floor, the Apache women blades, flashing eyes bright with something older than fear. Aida moved like wind and flame. In one arm, the baby pressed tight. In the other, a curved knife that caught the sun like vengeance reborn. Monroe's men faltered. They hadn't come for warriors. They'd come expecting victims. They were wrong. One woman slashed the leg of a man as he tried to reload. Another knocked a soldier from his horse with a stolen rifle butt. Garrett fought like he'd never left the war, side by side with Aida's second, a woman with gray streaks in her hair and blood on her cheek. Amid the chaos, Monroe staggered backward, a gash on his arm, blooming red. He saw me. I stepped forward. Dust in my hair, shotgun trembling slightly. "You'll hang for this," he hissed, breathing hard. "No," I said. "You will." For a second, just a breath, I saw the flicker in his eyes, the realization that his war wasn't righteous anymore, that we weren't broken, that we weren't afraid. He turned and mounted. "Fall back," he shouted, and they did, like smoke, like cowards, like men who met something they didn't believe could stand. When the dust cleared, silence came, not the silence of fear, but of something new. The silence of survival, of voices no longer buried. Aida stood in the center of the chapel yard, baby in arms, her people around her. Garrett nodded once, and for the first time, I saw something unspoken pass between them. A vow. I looked down at my hands. Dirt. Blood. A cracked thumbnail. But no shame. I had always dreamed of being chosen. That morning, I chose. The silence after a gunfight is not peace. It's the ache of what almost died and the weight of what still might. We buried two that morning. One wore a uniform. One wore war paint and a quiet smile. Garrett shaped crosses from splintered fence posts, his knuckles bleeding. Aida knelt beside the graves, fingers pressed to the earth, as if listening for a heartbeat beneath it. The baby slept impossibly through it all. In the crook of Aida's arm, she was safe untouched. The only one among us who didn't carry shame or memory in her breath. The others looked to me, not Garrett, not the preacher. Me. That terrified me more than the sound of bullets or the taste of blood. My father sat on the chapel steps, his Bible in his lap hands, trembling. But it wasn't fear. It was something quieter, more hollow. Regret, maybe. We didn't chase Monroe. He had left a threat behind, not a challenge, and sometimes silence is a more dangerous promise than words. The townspeople trickled in after 2 days, not with pitchforks or torches, but with their eyes downcast and voices low. Some brought bread, others brought rumors. Deputy Silas Kemp returned with bandages and a bag of grain. He stood before the chapel like a child asking forgiveness. I heard Monroe's gone to Santa Fe. Said hell returned with charges. Said you led an armed uprising. I stared at him. Do you believe that? He hesitated. I believe what I saw here was truth, raw and ugly, but truth. Garrett stepped forward. Then you'd better pick your side now, before the fire comes back. Silas left. But 3 days later, he returned again, this time with his own brother's hunting rifle and 4 friends who knew how to use one. In the hush that followed the skirmish, I wrote. I wrote names, stories, dates. I wrote truths that might vanish if we didn't etch them down in ink. I didn't know what I was building. A testimony, a history, a warning. I found my father inside the chapel one night, staring at the empty pulpit. I spent my whole life preaching about mercy, he said without turning. And when it came time to live it, I failed. I stepped closer. You taught me to kneel, but never how to rise. He turned, then older than I'd ever seen him. I wanted to keep you clean, but you handed me to wolves and called it salvation. He said nothing as I left. That night, I burned my old dress, the blue one with stitched flowers and lace sleeves. I buried the ashes beneath the graves out back. The twist came on a brittle morning. A man on horseback approached dusk, trailing behind like smoke. He wore white, claimed he was a messenger from the court in Santa Fe. He handed me an envelope addressed to the Reverend Thomas Valencia. I opened it. A tribunal. Accusations. Sedition. Aiding fugitives. A witness who would testify. The name scrawled at the bottom, Thomas Valencia. My hands shook. Garrett reached for the letter, read it, and cursed under his breath. Aida was already gone, vanished into the hills with the baby. I stormed into the chapel. You betrayed us, I said. I saved you, he whispered. I lifted the Bible from his lap and hurled it across the floor. Pages tore, fluttering like broken wings. You saved your name, not me. I walked out. My footsteps left ash behind. He came to the chapel square the next day, hat in hand, eyes on the ground. I couldn't watch my daughter hang, he said. She won't, Garrett said. But you might. The townsfolk murmured. Some nodded, others turned away. No one spoke in his defense. Garrett asked, Where's your God now? My father didn't answer. That night, I found Aida by the river, the baby sleeping beside her. She handed the child to me. The baby's fingers curled around a strand of my hair. What happens now? I asked. Aida said, We walk. We carry truth on our backs. It's not light, but it's ours. I looked to the hills. The wind was shifting, and so were we. It was the stars that found us first. Before the law, before the whispers, before we knew what the end might look like. Garrett and I had taken shelter in the scorched bones of the old trading post. We rebuilt it stone by stone, made it livable again, not by design, but by will. The chapel bell, once a weapon of control, now hung from a beam, wed, carved ourselves, ringing only when someone returned home. Aida was gone. She left at dawn with the canyon mist wrapping her shoulders and the baby pressed close. She said no words, but beneath the child's blanket, I found a small leather pouch holding a handful of earth a single turquoise bead, and a lock of her hair. A blessing. A goodbye. The child stayed with us. And in time, so did the town. Not all, of course, but enough. 53 souls gathered around the chapel steps the day the lawmen returned Monroe's legacy printed on warrants, armed with rifles and righteousness. They expected fear, silence, another easy conquest. But we stood shoulder to shoulder. The saloon girls, the ranch hands, Silas Kemp now sober. Even the blacksmith's boy with a crooked leg and fire in his eyes. I stepped forward, my dress plain but clean, my hair pinned back like Mother used to do. The baby clung to my hip. In my other hand, I held a journal, pages worn, ink-smudged, truth bleeding through every paragraph. This is the account you missed, I told them. The version without glory or lies. Their leader, a lieutenant too young to have seen blood, lifted his chin. By law, you're all fugitives. Garrett placed his hand on my back. Silas walked to my side. And from the back, a hush fell as Reverend Valenciami, father, stepped forward. He carried nothing. Not even his collar. I was the first to condemn her, he said. Not because she sinned, but because I feared she'd awakened something I had long buried, my own cowardice. He looked at me, then tears like rivers through a cracked face. I will not let fear speak again. One of the lawmen reached for his rifle. 50 others took a step forward, and for one breathless second we stood at the edge of violence. Then the baby cried, sharp, soft, like a bell. The lawman's hand stilled. The lieutenant exhaled. He looked at the journal in my hands, at the baby on my hip, at the people behind me. Then slowly he folded the warrant, tucked it into his vest. We were told this town was dead, he said. But I see something breathing. They left, without a shot, without a name taken, without a single flame set. That night we rang the bell, not in mourning, but in relief, in resistance, in rebirth. The church became a schoolhouse, the sheriff's office a communal kitchen. The saloon's bar turned into benches where stories were shared instead of drinks. I taught the children letters and songs, both in English and Apache. Aida's lullaby became our morning prayer. Garrett built aqueducts with Silas, whittling peace out of cacti and sandstone. One evening, he handed me a ring fashioned from the last bullet we hadn't fired. Will you wear it? He asked. I won't wear it to belong, I whispered. I'll wear it to remember why we chose not to kill. He kissed my knuckles. No vows spoken, none needed. My father died that spring. Quietly in the schoolhouse he helped repair. I buried him near the chapel under the olive tree. No tombstone, only the pages of his sermons and a ribbon I wore as a child, bound together with twine buried in a tin box beneath the roots. Some stories belong to silence. The boy grew into a young man with eyes like dusk, half shadow, half wonder. One night, he sat beside me, the stars crackling above like coals across the sky. Why didn't you leave? He asked. I thought of all the moments I could have. The train, the canyon, the rope, the ring. Because someone had to stay, I said. Someone had to remember. He nodded, thoughtful, then stood and walked toward the bell. He untied it from the beam and carried it down the hill. I didn't stop him. Let him build something new from it. Let the fire continue in another shape. They still tell stories about us, that we were witches, sinners, rebels, lovers, saints. Let them talk. Legends are just truth with the edges burned off. What matters is this. We stood. We stayed. We began again. This story isn't just about the Wild West, it's about every quiet battle we face inside. About how standing for what's right often begins when we're most afraid. Clara, a young woman burdened by shame, injustice, and silence, chose not just to survive, but to transform. Through fire, betrayal, and heartbreak, she built something new, not by fighting harder, but by loving deeper, remembering longer, and refusing to let violence define the future. For those of us past 40, who've seen how time bends truth, how systems can fail, and how silence can crush spirit, this tale reminds us we still hold power. The power to shift old beliefs, to stand by those without a voice, and to mend what's broken, not with might, but with presence. In our world, today, louder, faster, often colder, may we take from Clara's journey a quiet wisdom that rebuilding begins with listening. That strength lives in tenderness, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stay, speak the truth, and light the way for those who will come after. You've just heard one powerful story, but many more remain untold. Click to discover more raw, gripping, deeply human tales from the Wild West.